Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Deku and Death. This will be part 55, the second half to chapter 53. Midoriya went to sleep uneasy that night, and the fact that he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was keeping him restless didn't exactly help his paranoia. His mind raced like a runaway train, thinking much too hard and much too late into the night. He tossed and turned, using the sound of his light shuffling to drive away the hurricane in his head. It wasn't until Gami started running his bony fingers through his hair that he was finally able to close his eyes, mind dulled by the pressure to his scalp. He woke up worse than the night before, but he just considered himself lucky to have gotten any sleep at all. And when he met the rest of his class back outside, it became apparent that he wasn't the only one. They were divided up again, and Midoriya was led back to his familiar clearing, still in the same barren state as he'd left it the day prior. Pixie Bob intuitively made him an extra pile of rocks to practice with, alongside resetting the cat statue and flattening out the earth. She quickly left him to his own devices, but Midoriya was much slower to get to work, allowing himself a moment to admire the rising sun. He took a deep breath, the first one seemingly in months. Okay. He opened his eyes, focusing on Gami off to the side. Where were we yesterday?
You made good progress. One path of decay with rather precise control and direction. It could use a bit of fine-tuning, but that shouldn't be anything particularly difficult. Gami listed off that accomplishment on his fingers. It is, however, rather sluggish, unlike your usual decay.
Midoriya agreed. Yeah, running up to the thing to touch it would be faster than trying from afar at this point.
There was also the matter of yesterday's unintended explosion, as well as the possibility of accidentally hurting yourself with this new technique.
No recovery girl out here, he mumbled, flexing his hands to reaffirm their usual softness. We have to figure this out quickly, or we'll have to put it on hold until we get back to school. Midoriya chewed on his lip, pondering his options. Let's figure out the explosion first, he decided, because that definitely wasn't supposed to happen. He settled to a seat on the dirt, crossing his legs and placing one hand in his lap. The other hand he rose to the sky, palm pointed upward. There was a slight breeze in the air, threading itself between his fingers and through his hair like a friendly greeting. Midoriya returned the pleasantries, recalling the well-memorized feeling he'd first met with Gran Torino. Death's touch rushed forward instantly, and he was subsequently tussled by his own explosion as it rocked the space around him, kicking up dust into a billowy cloud that stretched far above the tree line. He wasn't startled, nor was he shook from his spot. This was expected. That was the explosion he'd come to learn and know from his internship. Still, he saved the experience to memory, making sure it was firmly secured as a reference as he placed his other hand on the ground. He kept all 5 fingers down, pressing them deeper as he allowed his death's touch to escape. Midoriya held himself in place for a few moments, waiting for the same deafening blast to rock his eardrums, but his surroundings were eerily quiet, as he only felt his hand sink deeper. Sure enough, when he peeked his eyes open, he'd merely made a sizable divot in the earth. Well, that didn't really work. I guess trying to make an explosion without air as a conduit just decays instead. Gami observed from behind.
But it clearly did work yesterday. You had a path from object to object, and then it did explode.
He quieted, remembering that last attempt yesterday.
You were experimenting with leaping. What if the path had leapt into the air for a split second?
I guess that would technically be a possibility since air is just another medium for decay, and if that did happen, it would, in theory, explode. Midoriya continued hypothetically. But that wasn't what I was trying to do.
But what if that is what occurred?
Gami rushed over, grabbing his successor's wrist and placing it down on the dirt again, removing all but one finger.
Try what we were doing yesterday. Just a path and nothing more.
Midoriya snorted, shoving Gami off him playfully, but nonetheless complied with the request. The Death's touch was almost reluctant to come out, pulling in his hand. It was such an alien feeling, especially considering how easily it escaped when he made the explosion above him earlier, and when he disintegrated the ground by his feet. Death's touch had always been such a rampant force, an unstoppable energy he fought to contain and learn to direct. Now it remained just as strong, but it almost fought to exist under his skin rather than spread its destruction elsewhere. Still, eventually a crack formed underneath his fingertip, and Midoriya began snaking it around the clearing, keeping it contained within the perimeter. He twisted it around a few times, looking at Gami over his shoulder. "What do you want me to do with it?"
The ghost tapped his hands together. "Can you jump it to the air, like you did yesterday with the other objects?" He was skeptical, but he still closed his eyes to try and envision the feel of air again, just like he had for the leaves and branches before. He tried to imagine the transition from dense, crumbly earth to light, floaty air, the feeling as a bird takes off or as a plane climbs from the runway. He tried to channel the weightless sensation in his stomach, lifting, lifting, lifting. "Are you trying?" Midoriya snapped his eyes back open with an annoyed scowl.
"Of course I'm trying. Is it not working?"
Gami gestured at the crack, having diverted off in a random direction as Midoriya had lost focus, but still firmly planted in the ground. Quickly, he forced his decay into a curve, keeping the destruction contained only as far as he could see.
"Damn it, that doesn't make sense. It should work the same."
Midoriya lifted both hands up in frustration. Just before his finger left the dirt, however, he could have sworn he felt the Death's touch in his veins rush forward for a moment. The crack almost mimicked that sensation, barreling forward for nothing more than a blink, until the end exploded.
"What?"
Midoriya shot to his feet, watching pieces of earth and dust cascade from the air.
"I wasn't even trying. How did that happen?"
"Your hand." He looked down at his hand in confusion, but it looked just the same as before. "No." Gami pulled his focus back up. "You lifted it. You did the same thing during your last attempt yesterday with the explosion."
"But why should that matter? I mean, I was picking my hand up and down all day yesterday, but it wasn't until right at the end that I made the blast by accident."
"But all the times before, you had finished. You were no longer using decay." Midoriya considered the words before putting a finger back onto the earth, forming another controlled crack. Just as quickly, he pulled his hand away, without any intention of stopping his own destruction, and just like before, the end of the path surged before erupting violently. Gami jumped excitedly. "See? See?" His eyes widened in realization.
"I was so focused on control and direction that, when I cut it off by accident before, I think it reverted back to how it usually is."
Midoriya made a branching image with his fingers.
"You know, wild and rampant, but only for a second."
Gami nodded. "Perhaps it is simply searching for something to destroy in its final moments, and in turn decays everything around it."
"Including air." Midoriya pointed at the ghost in conclusion.
"Thus," Gami made a booming sound with his voice, complete with hand effects. The boy smiled eagerly, placing his hand down to try again. He snaked the trail of decay around for longer this time, mimicking some of the test runs he and Gami had tried yesterday. He imagined how it could move strategically around buildings, past fellow heroes and civilians, ignoring hazards, until it was right under a villain's feet. He ripped his hand away, and a loud explosion bursted from the earth right where his eyes were locked.
"Oh, that's so cool!"
he cheered, bouncing to his feet in celebration.
"And really useful, too. I bet I could get it to jump to air with enough practice. I wouldn't even need to lift my hand up."
"Slow down there, one thing at a time." Gami joked, patting the top of Midoriya's head. It is rather interesting, though.
I just don't get why it's so slow.
What's with all the noise over here? Midoriya and Gami spun around, finding Ragdoll at the edge of the clearing, waving brightly at him. She skipped into frame, very clearly peeking around him to look at the destruction etched into the dirt. I hope I'm not interrupting you. We could hear the explosions from base camp, and Aizawa asked if I could come check in. Ragdoll explained, then immediately turned to the side to pout. As if my quirk couldn't do that already. Midoriya cocked his head, any prior questions about the interruption gone. Your quirk? The hero almost seemed to light up further. That's right. Aizawa never gave us a chance to introduce ourselves. She pointed at her face with her oversized paws, widening her eyes in response. Her pupils, already somewhat larger than normal, dilated further into shiny yellow pools. My quirk is called Search. It lets me monitor about 100 people at a time and stores that data in my memory. With that, it's pretty easy to track things like location, which is why we can let some of you with more volatile quirks train off by yourselves. Ragdoll joyfully clapped. Of course, that's just a party trick at this point. If I get a really good look at someone, I can see all sorts of secret things, like quirk weaknesses and old injuries. Midoriya's eyes widened, a gasp trickling through his parted lips. That's incredible. Do you still retain all that information from a person when you switch targets? Ragdoll laughed at his eagerness. Well, since everything is stored up here, she tapped at the side of her temple. It's more a matter of memory than anything, though if I look at someone I've already searched, the data comes back pretty quick. She looked at Midoriya more closely, her eyes bouncing up and down his form. He shifted nervously, suddenly feeling strangely exposed. Are you searching right now? Ragdoll blinked, breaking her stare, and took a step back, waving her hands sheepishly. Oh no, that would be incredibly invasive. I try not to search any deeper than location unless someone lets me. Other than for hero work, you know? The smile returned to her face as she waved herself off dismissively. Speaking of which, would you mind if I use my quirk to take a closer look? You know what they say about curiosity in cats. Midoriya's lips parted nervously, resisting the urge to look at Gami like a lost child. How would someone like him even look to a quirk like Ragdoll's? Would he look normal? Passable? He was just a regular person underneath all his double-edged bells and whistles, right? He licked his lips awkwardly, dried out by the still air. Yeah, go ahead. She flashed a sharp, toothy grin, and Midoriya swore he could see the rings of her irises spin like the orbit of a planet, or the shifting of clock gears, magical and mechanical all at once. Her eyes darted like the flight of a bumblebee, seemingly entranced and distracted by every atom in his body, like an overwhelmed computer program. Midoriya looked down at himself more than a few times, trying to see what could possibly be so interesting about him. Because of that, he missed the way her eagerness slowly drained from her face, replaced by something akin to mortification. He missed it, but Gami, ever quiet, ever forgotten, did not. How are you still standing? He glanced back up, blinking softly as his heart stuttered. Huh? Ragdoll's frown only deepened. Your body. It looks like it could fall apart at any moment. I can't even fathom what could possibly be holding you together. It doesn't seem like your quirk. When her eyes met his, the gaze felt soft and wet. It doesn't hurt? I want to hear that heroic little facade of yours break. Midoriya wasn't quite sure what to say. There will always be cancers of this hero society, and someone needs to correct that. Midoriya wasn't quite sure what he could say that wouldn't be a lie. Everyone will finally understand when I show them that there's no world where everyone is safe. His heart felt like a rock in his chest. He wondered if she could see that too.
Not really, he settled on. I've had to visit Recovery Girl a lot. I'm definitely a bit sick of hospital rooms at this point. He tried to joke. He tried to keep things light-hearted. I'm sure Aizawa-sensei has probably mentioned some things in passing. In the end, he didn't say much, and just let her own mind fill in the gaps. Still, she bit her lip, shamefully. Sulking in the soured mood, her eyes seemingly unable to look past whatever overwhelming damage invaded his body. Midoriya rubbed his arm awkwardly, breaking away from her gaze to turn his downcast, far from where the shame could hurt him secondhand. He missed the way her eyes spun with new life, her analytic instinct slowly overpowering any lingering guilt or regret. Your veins kind of look fuzzy, like they have TV static running through them. Ragdoll changed the subject abruptly, but her words sparked enough of Midoriya's curiosity for his mind to easily shift away. That's your quirk, isn't it? He looked down at his hands, trying to see the same. I think so. My decay usually feels like buzzing, so I think that sounds right. That buzzing feeling, I would think it's your body naturally trying to keep your quirk contained, and your quirk fighting against it. That's what it looks like, at least. She stepped closer, grabbing one of his bare hands to look at it further. But the veins in your hands look clogged, like they should have bursted from overflow, but are all swollen up instead. Those blasts you've been using, they're causing you extreme nerve damage. Midoriya yanked away his hands suddenly, holding them close to his chest. Shit, I'm probably causing nerve damage again. Gami lurched closer at his outburst, rapidly inspecting his successor himself for any signs of damage, but the boy jerked away on instinct, subsequently sinking in on himself in shame. The last time I experimented with my decay, I ended up seriously damaging my hands, he explained to the concern on Ragdoll's face. I got lucky then because I had Recovery Girl there to help me, but what now? I thought I was being more careful this time. He cursed under his breath, fighting the urge to dig his nails into his skin in frustration. What was he supposed to do now? Gami and him had been so conscious about avoiding potentially hurting himself from training, and yet he'd still managed it. He'd repeated the mantra countless times in his head, even falling asleep to it in his thoughts. There was no Recovery Girl out here. It had clearly done nothing, however, as his instinctual nature to wrap himself up with danger prevailed. But Ragdoll merely hummed in calm, collective thought, looking closer at her quirk's projections of his hands. Your hands don't seem injured, at least not from anything recent. Something like that would have obviously popped up with my quirk. She cocked her head to the side, tapping her finger on her chin. Could you show me what you've been doing? I might be able to get a better sense of why your veins look like that. Is that a good idea? He asked skeptically. What if I make it worse? You won't. I'll stop you the second I see something. The hero widened her eyes, the rings around her pupils spinning in anticipation. Regardless, Midoriya still shuffled with hesitation, turning away until he felt the soft pressure of Gami's sharp, bony fingers on his shoulder. I trust her. And just like old times, Gami's judgment was all he needed to change his mind. Midoriya crouched down, nestling himself in the dirt once again. With a deep breath, he placed one finger onto the earth, releasing the natural tension in his body, used to keep his own destruction at bay. But just like his earlier experiments, his decay moved sluggishly even inside himself, lacking its usual fervent charge to consume. He had to push it through his hands, straining himself against the aggressive buzz that seemed to want nothing more than to root itself in place. All right, stop. He did so immediately, relishing in the relief of his death's touch settling back inside his body. He flopped back on his rear, eyes closed shut as he struggled to catch his breath. Only when he opened them did he notice that Ragdoll had stopped him before he could even make a crack in the ground. When you're using your quirk, it looks like it physically travels all across your body to get to your hands, but then you're only releasing it through one finger. It's like trying to drain a milkshake through a straw that's too small. Ragdoll held up her hands, one open as if she was holding something very large, and one with her fingers pinched. You have all this power, but the pathway you're using is too small, so it's struggling to get through. Then you're forcing it in response, but all that's doing is swelling up your veins to accommodate. Midoriya looked down at his hands again. So that's why it's so slow. But I couldn't get it to work yesterday when I was using all my fingers. It was branching out too fast for me to control. Pixie Bob told me to just use one. Are you saying she was wrong? She thought for a moment. I can see why she would say that. That's how she started learning how to control the power of her own earth flow. But I don't think she realized that you're still releasing the same power output regardless. Ragdoll lowered herself, crouching down next to the boy and placing a pawed hand on the ground with all 5 fingers spread out. This is how you normally release your quirk, right? The same way Pixie Bob does? He nodded. Yeah, but like that, I can't control it the way I want to. Well, she hummed. Have you tried this? With that, the hero pinched her fingers in, still with all 5 pads pressed down, but all condensed together. Midoriya's eyes widened, and silently he mimicked the action. Still with some hesitance, he slowly allowed Death's touch to flow, expecting to feel the same immediate pushback as every time before, but the buzz hit him with full force instead, slamming through him like a collapsing dam, like a hole punched through his chest and straight out of his body, like normal. Decay barreled out of his fingers but stayed woven together in a straight line, shooting through the earth with dangerous speed until Midoriya lifted his hand out of shock, resulting in a violent explosion, much larger than anything he'd managed so far. Whoa, he breathed out, a mixture of awe and relief, before the delay of adrenaline finally hit him. Whoa! Ragdoll smiled, finally allowing her eyes to rest. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so I'd say everything's fixed. Everything's fixed? So my hands look okay? Well, I wouldn't say that exactly, she shrugged. Nothing looks worse, so I don't think you're fighting your quirk anymore. I'd take it easy for today, let your body recover after putting it under so much strain. I'll check up on you later to see if anything's changed, and we can go from there. A little unsatisfied, Midoriya nodded his head regardless, thanking the hero again for her help. She left with a cute wave, much like the lucky cats that Pixie Bob's statue resembled. The boy watched her disappear into the shrubbery, waiting until he was certain she was gone before turning to Gami. The ghost knew that conniving look. She just told you to rest. He rolled his eyes with a sly smile in return, settling back down into a low crouch. Technically, she said take it easy. Excitedly, he placed his fingers in the dirt once more, this time together, instead of one alone. All Gami could do was sigh into his wispy, invisible hands, wondering if his voice had disappeared along with him. Midoriya expectantly did not take it easy. To his credit, he didn't push himself as hard as normal, nor did Gami push him all that willingly, but the ground still had scars from his eagerness. A few attempts from all 5 fingers bunched together were enough to convince him that he still wasn't in control of the full condensed power of Death's touch, so he strayed away from that, opting to train with 2 and 3 fingers instead. He made quick progress in regaining a similar level of command as before, and Gami seemed to be at least somewhat supportive with him exerting himself less. His hands didn't hurt, not like they had to begin with, but Midoriya took it as a good sign regardless. He tired out quickly, though if that was just a result of his extensive training for the past 2 days or anything related to the swollen veins Ragdoll had pointed out to him, he wasn't sure. But much to his mentor's delight, he did have to call it quits much earlier than he would have liked. He laid back onto the dusty earth, letting the rays from the slowly lowering sun sink into his skin. Gami sat next to him, starting up some quiet chatter, reminiscent of simpler times. Midoriya justified it in his head. It would do little for him to return to the base grounds early, plus, even if he would have rather otherwise, he could admit the break was a pleasant relief to his aching limbs. Eventually, they did head back to regroup with the others, looking equally as exhausted. The time out in the sun didn't exactly help Midoriya's fatigue, his steps sluggish and muddy. Dad had managed to cue Ragdoll in that he hadn't truly followed her advice, and after a slight, nagging earful, she checked him over thoroughly with her quirk. Thankfully, she noted nothing of concern. In fact, it seemed that the swelling caused by his quirk had decreased, a sign that her and Pixie Bob's advice combined had been exactly what he'd been missing. The last of the Class 1A stragglers poured in, along with Aizawa and Bakugo. At first, all Midoriya could do was naturally relish in the fact that both were alive and well, cursing internally that he allowed himself even a moment of reprieve with his premonition still active. But as his eyes settled more closely, he could see the awkward way Bakugo shuffled uncharacteristically, the faded tension still wrapped around Aizawa's bones. It was more than unusual, bringing a small frown to his face, but he resolved to ask the teacher about it later in private. Aizawa dropped on them that they would be cooking dinner again as a class, not that Midoriya expected otherwise at this point. Most of the class seemed of the same morale, but Yaoyorozu and Ida quickly rallied everyone up before things got too bummed. The ingredients they were working with were mostly the same, likely part of a large surplus the Pussycats had in storage. But they were given noodles over rice this time, and Yaoyorozu was quick to suggest a curry udon instead. The immediate bustling of the campgrounds betrayed the fact that any one of them had spent the entire day training out in the sun, all working cohesively with renewed vigor and a bit more pep. The thick scent of a home-cooked meal wafted through the air with the welcoming heat of a hearth, the faintest echo of a simpler life trailing up along with firewood smoke. Midoriya cupped his own warm bowl with gentle hands, soaking up the feeling deep into his skin. He was almost too impatient to bother grabbing chopsticks, half tempted to lift the edge up to his lips directly. Gami dashed that idea away with a swat, however realistic it truly was in his successor's thoughts. "Whatever it is that you're thinking, I can tell it's a dumb idea." The ghost turned over his shoulder, toward the cacophony of the rest of Midoriya's classmates already seated and well into both meal and conversation. "You better find a seat already, or you're going to end up eating alone, while the rest of them hog up the showers." Midoriya snorted, but otherwise moved to comply, when something out of the corner of his eye caught his attention. Kota, head downcast, shoulders scrunched, muttering bitterly under his breath. Kota, storming off into the dense forest, turned back from the soft glow of coals and laughter. Kota, empty-handed, despite the leftovers still bubbling over the fire. Kota, alone. "I know this is a lot to ask, but it would mean so much to us, and to Kota eventually, if you could take some time to talk to him." Midoriya stared for a moment, just long enough for the younger boy to disappear amongst the leaves, much like the other pussycats. Then, without so much as another thought, he raised the bowl to his lips and downed its contents in a series of rough, barbaric gulps. "You're going to give yourself indigestion," Gami harped, giving him a few harsh pats on the back anyway. Midoriya breathed out the steam he'd swallowed in the process, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. He ignored the lively crowd of his classmates in favor of the cooking pot, placing his bowl down in the empty pile of dirty dishes. He scooped a hearty serving into a clean one, and just as silently as before, set out in chase. Midoriya and Gami stumbled off into the night, guided only by silvery starlight that peeked through the gaps in the leaves. At first, he wandered rather aimlessly, heading in the general direction he last saw Kota go. But Gami, much to even the ghost's own surprise, pointed out the small, almost invisible indentations in the dirt. Stamped in such a geometrical pattern, it couldn't be anything natural. Footprints. Sneaker tracks, to be specific. Midoriya had no idea how Gami had managed to notice them in the first place, but now he walked much more confidently into the forest, careful not to step over any of the marks with his own shoes. Gami was more than sure it wasn't he who noticed the footprints, but rather someone else, though he chose to keep that thought between himself and his other half. Their pace slowed as the trail became more inclined and less green. Leading up to a significant opening far above the tree line, sat near the mouth of a small cave with a wonderfully unobstructed view of the city. The teen couldn't help a slight pause to breathe it all in. It was a gorgeous spot. It reminded him a lot of Dagobah. It made sense why Kota was drawn here, sitting alone with his knees curled into his chest at the edge. The boy hadn't noticed him yet, and honestly, Midoriya wasn't quite sure how to break the silence. Hey, I bet you're hungry. I brought you a plate." Kota jumped out of his skin, snapping his head towards Midoriya. "You? How'd you know I was here?" "Oh, sorry." He suddenly felt intrusive now, setting down the bowl of curry almost like an offering. "I followed your footprints. I thought you might want some food." He kept his voice light, honest, like he was talking to a stray cat. Yesterday, he'd made the mistake of trying to appeal to Kota in front of everyone, and that had only put the boy on the defensive, pushing him to lash out. He thought this was better, trying to talk with him in private, in a space Kota found comfortable, but at the end of the day, Midoriya was certainly intruding. That fact was made especially clear by the nasty glare Kota shot him in return. "Nope. Didn't you get it yesterday? I don't want to fraternize with you people, so get away from my secret base." Midoriya could have walked away after that. He'd already set down the food. He'd done what he'd come here to do. He could have walked away with a clear conscience. Try again tomorrow, something, anything else. He is hurting, but more devastatingly, he is hurting alone. But he hesitated, shuffling nervously in his spot, and that was enough to set Kota off once again. "Improving quirks. Like that's the only thing in life that matters. It's disgusting." Kota stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "All of you are obsessed. You're willing to destroy your own body for what? Just to flaunt your power? You can all kill each other already as it is." I don't think that's the motivations of every hero, especially not of anyone here." Midoriya frowned, instinctively quick to defend the honor of his friends and of every hero he'd seen risk their life for the lives of others. "Your parents, they were water hose, right?" He'd meant it as a way to connect Kota to heroes he couldn't argue weren't honorable, but immediately he realized his mistake as the boy snapped aggressively at him, and for once, Midoriya couldn't stop himself from taking an unconscious, defensive step back. "How the hell did you know that?" The kid lurched like he was actually going to punch him, any consideration of thought long gone. "Did Mandalay tell you?" "What? No, I mean, sorry." Midoriya floundered, slipping up with his tongue in a desperate attempt not to screw up Kota's relationship with Mandalay any further. "We were just talking, and I thought, from the conversation, I just assumed." Gami placed a reserved hand on his shoulder, and that was enough for Midoriya to stop talking completely. They stood together, alone, silently, surrounded by deafening echoes. Angry, for sure, but perhaps confused, reeling from pain, old and new, and wondering if healing was just breaking themselves apart in hiding. To him, it was like they left him all alone. "I'm sorry about what happened," Midoriya whispered under his breath, like the very air displaced by his voice would be the force to do them all in. "I'm sorry that you had to go through it alone." "Shut up." It was venomous, but there was still an underlying quiver in the words that Midoriya couldn't ignore. "You're all idiots, calling yourselves heroes or villains and going around killing each other like idiots. Like dying is the greatest thing you could do with your life. You're all stupid. Kota lowered his head, covering his expression with the brim of his red cap, but he couldn't hide the anguished glower his mouth had curled into, baring his teeth like cornered fangs. Taken aback by the harsh truth in his words, Midoriya looked away shamefully. What if I wasn't able to get back up? He must have been standing there a while since Kota snapped at him again. What's your problem? If you're done here, then get out. Midoriya, dear, you would have died. It's just... He struggled to gather the right words. I knew a boy, a friend of mine. He didn't inherit a quirk from his parents. Instead, he got something else. Something totally different. I am much worse, dear child. He got a quirk that prevented him from dying. The tension ebbed out of Kota's shoulders. What? The boy felt obligated to be a hero, to throw himself into danger whenever he could, because he thought that life was fragile, and his was not. No one else gets to fight with the security of knowing they'll be fine no matter what. He didn't think it was a big deal since, he would always get back up. Midoriya chuckled somberly, looking off into the night with a sad smile, away from Kota's piercing eyes. He would get hurt all the time, and for a while, it didn't really bother him. He thought it was a good thing, actually. He thought he was doing everyone else a favor, that he was protecting the people he cared about, by making sure his life was the only one at risk. I have to be better. I have to last longer. I wasn't good enough this time. I can't let that happen again. There was one time where he got hurt really, really badly. Izuku! Midoriya! Midori! Oh my God! And after the whole thing was over, he thought it was fine. But the people he protected, the people he cared about, they weren't okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I left you. Sure, they were alive, but the whole time he recovered, they were sad. They were sad that he got hurt protecting them, but really, they were upset that he threw his life away like it didn't mean anything. And that was when the boy finally understood that his death, while not permanent, did have consequences to the people that he loved. It has to be about you, not only for yourself, but for everyone who holds you close in their hearts. Midoriya paused to take a breath, if only to keep stray tears locked behind his eyes. After that, the boy made it his goal to get stronger. Everyone thought it was just because he wanted to be a hero, because he didn't want to lose again, but I know that he does it because he wants to live, because the people he cares about want him to live too. Midoriya couldn't pick out the look on Kota's face, so he chose to stop looking entirely. The boy didn't realize all that at first, but he had a really good friend who helped him. You don't know when to shut up, do you? Kota snarled, swiping his hand out, if only to emphasize the gap between them. Just go! Midoriya figured he must have said something wrong along the way, but he wasn't expecting his heart to hurt this much, like a piece of lead in his chest. He looked down at his empty hands, like he was Ragdoll and could see something more. I'm sorry. I've just been rambling, haven't I? He'd already set down the food. He'd done what he'd come here to do. He could have walked away with a clear conscience. That was impossible now. He turned away, catching the faintest growl escape Kota's lips under his breath. He walked faster, if only to convince the other that he was leaving for good this time. The night was quiet, and the forest was sleeping, and yet Midoriya could have sworn he'd never heard anything louder. Because of that, he missed the soft hitch behind him as resentment shifted to sorrow. He missed it, but Gami, ever quiet, ever forgotten, heard the sobs of both. All right, listeners, this concludes the second half to Chapter 53 of Deku and Death. Chapter 54 will be up next. Personally, for me, I'd love to share some of my own thoughts. I really like the ending to this chapter. I love this interaction scene between Izuku and Kota because we finally get to get an understanding of the fact that Izuku is valuing his life, and he's saying it in a way to Kota that makes so much sense, right? Where, yes, he's talking about a third party, but we know he's talking about himself and how he's recognizing the kind of impact it has on the people around him when he gets hurt or when he ends up in a situation where he throws his life on the line just because he has that immortality. So Izuku coming to a place of being able to value himself as much as he should be, and us getting some verbal confirmation of some of that. Of course, I know that's been a theme throughout this fic, is Izuku getting to a place of being able to accept the value of his own life, but I think that the author does an incredible job with this conversation and how it plays out, and the way in which Izuku conveys some of that to Kota, even though he tries to mask it as not talking about himself. So those are my thoughts, but I'd still like to hear yours, so please drop your comments and reactions. I just love to sit through and read them when I get time. And of course, this fic is located over on AO3, so you can always slide over leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author as well. I'm sure it's much appreciated. As without the authors who write these fanfics and give permission for podfics, we wouldn't have them to begin with. It's always showing that respect where we can. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.